Good day to everyone. It's my pleasure to meet you. I am Father Jim Kroeger, and I'm giving a very brief introduction to the missionary renewal of the Church in the Vatican II era. In fact, we can say that since the time of Vatican II, indeed, yes, there has been a wonderful missionary renewal in the Church. Vatican II itself was very, very important. It lasted for 4 years, and people have said that it is the most significant religious event of the 20th century. In an entire century, the most significant religious event. What was the goal of the Second Vatican Council? In the word coined by John the 23rd, he said it must be aggiornamento, renewal, bringing the Church up to date in all of its dimensions, ad intra and ad extra, meaning within the Church and outside the Church. And indeed, yes, Vatican II promoted a missionary renewal. In this period since Vatican II, there have been 4 important mission documents. What are they? Vatican II itself, Ad Gentes, Evangelii Nuntiandi of Pope Paul VI, Redemptoris Missio of John Paul II, and recently Evangelii Gaudium of Pope Francis. Let me give a very brief synopsis of some key insights from each of the 4 documents. And so we go to the first document, Ad Gentes, to the nations, the mission document that indeed is found in the documents of the Second Vatican Council. There are 16 documents, and Ad Gentes indeed was very positively received by all of the bishop participants of the Second Vatican Council. It's interesting to note that this is the first time in history that the missions were treated specifically in an ecumenical council. What are some of the highlights of Ad Gentes? Indeed, there is a breakthrough on foundational doctrinal principles. And the breakthrough is this: where does mission begin? It begins in the very heart of God. The Church is modeled on Missio Dei, the mission of God. And so, because the Church is founded on the mission of God, the entire Church is missionary by her very nature. We could say it this way: mission, evangelization, is not something that the Church does, but fundamentally, it is what the Church is. Mission is at the very core of the Church. A second key item in Ad Gentes is, where does this mission come from? Ad Gentes says it flows from the fount-like love or charity of God. It's very interesting. Of course, you know, all of the Vatican II documents and the discussions were still all done in Latin. And so it describes the very heart of God using this word, fontalis amor. God is fundamentally love. a fountain-like love. A fountain overflows and overflows. God's love, indeed, is at the heart of mission. And so what we are doing in mission then is to manifest God's love, manifest God's very identity. It's an epiphany of God's love. One more key element that we find in Gentes is that this mission is shared by all the baptized, priests, deacons, religious laity, each according to their own state. This means that the entire church is missionary. Friends, 3 points from Vatican II, the highlights of the mission document, Gentes. I move now to the second of the important documents in the Vatican II era. And here it is Evangelii Nuntiandi, authored by Pope Paul VI, who concluded Vatican II and implemented Vatican II. By the way, he was canonized by Pope Francis on October 14th, 2018. People remember him as a modern missionary pope. He made journeys to all of the continents of the world. You may recall he came here to Asia for a long visit in November of 1970. And indeed, yes, his Evangelii Nuntiandi becomes the key for Catholic evangelization. Yes, Evangelii Nuntiandi is the most quoted document in Pope Francis's Evangelii Gaudium. What does Pope Paul VI say about evangelization? He says that his document, Evangelii Nuntiandi, the Gospels which must be announced, indeed is to be a meditation on evangelization. And indeed, this theme that we have to meditate and reflect about the Church's mission of evangelization comes in many, many places throughout the document. Another key theme, Pope Paul VI says, evangelization involves a double fidelity. We must be faithful to the gospel and faithful to the people to whom we preach the gospel. So the gospel and people's lives must always come together. A double fidelity to God's message and to the people. For Pope Paul, this is the central axis of evangelization, the central turning point of evangelization. How does Pope Paul understand evangelization? We can say he understands it in a very comprehensive and inclusive view, taking all dimensions into account, various elements. And indeed, yes, popularly we call that integral evangelization, affecting all areas of life, bringing the gospel into all areas of life. Or, as he says it in number 18, Paul VI says, evangelizing means bringing the good news into all strata of humanity. all dimensions, social, political, economic, cultural, all strata of humanity are to be affected by the good news. Finally, Paul VI is the first to describe Mary as the star of evangelization. What he means by that, she is a guiding star. And the way she lived out the gospel in her life, indeed, is the guide for the church. I move then to a third key document in this Vatican II era of missionary renewal. It is John Paul II's Redemptoris Missio, translated, the mission of the Redeemer. John Paul II, also a canonized saint, begins by stating his conviction about the urgency of missionary activity. And that's the goal of his encyclical. By the way, it's very helpful to appreciate Ad Gentes came in 1965. The 10th anniversary of that was 1975, when Paul VI wrote Evangelii Nuntiandi. And now the 25th anniversary of Vatican II's Ad Gentes is indeed the date of John Paul II's Redemptoris Missio. What does he speak about? The urgency of missionary activity. That's why he says he's writing this encyclical. He invites the entire church to renew her missionary commitment. He invites everyone, peoples everywhere, open the doors to Christ. Mission is not just something on the outside. It is integral to the church's very identity. John Paul goes on to say, mission is the greatest and holiest duty of the church. He says indeed, and he hopes that missionary dynamism should become contagious. Another theme that John Paul II emphasizes is that the key actors in the mission today are the local churches, the local Christian communities. Maybe in the past, missionary societies had that role. They are still very helpful, but the central actors in mission today are to be the local Christian communities. That's a challenge for all of us. I find it interesting that there's one quote that appears 3 times in this document. And this is it. We are obliged to hold that the Holy Spirit offers to everyone the possibility of sharing in the Paschal mystery in a manner known to God. What John Paul II is saying, God's salvation is for everyone. It includes all people. All are invited. If I would use a Filipino expression, I could say it this way: hindi kuripot ang ating Diyos. Our God is not stingy with His salvation, with His love. It is intended for everybody. Jesus sacrificed Himself for all. One final very beautiful quote from Redemptoris Missio is John Paul II quoting Paul VI. And he says this: modern people listen more willingly to witnesses than to teachers. And if they will listen to teachers, it is because these teachers are also witnesses. In other words, people today want to see an example of what living the gospel means. Our words are verified in the way we live our life. If people will listen to teachers, they have to see that these same teachers are indeed witnesses. I move then, in the limited time we have, to the fourth of these key mission documents in the Vatican II era. And that, you know it so well, is the joy of the gospel. Pope Francis illustrates that indeed with his life. In this, Francis is proposing a profound missionary renewal of the entire church. He says we must be a church that comes out of ourselves, not inner focus, not living within ourselves, always reaching out to the peripheries. Again, he says, I dream of a missionary option, that is, a missionary impulse capable of transforming everything. And then he goes on to say, all renewal in the church must have mission as its goal, otherwise it falls into an ecclesial introversion. Francis is very expressive. He says, missionary outreach is paradigmatic for all the church's activity. It's the paradigm, it's the model, it's the image we should follow. Yes, we are to be permanently in a state of mission. Where does this missionary dynamism emerge from? From a deep personal relationship with Christ. We know it so well. Francis says, I invite all Christians everywhere at this very moment to a renewed personal encounter with Jesus Christ. I ask all of you to do this unfailingly each day. That is a challenge. We become missionary out of our deep relationship with Christ. A key idea that Pope Francis puts forth is the idea of missionary disciples. In fact, he says, through our baptism, everyone has become a missionary disciple. He goes on to say that we no longer say we are disciples and missionaries, two aspects, but always it is integrated. We are always missionary disciples. Another key point, Pope Francis emphasizes the joy of evangelization. He says we have to enter a great stream of joy. And then, in a good sense of humor, Francis has some interesting things to say. He says, unfortunately, there are Christians whose lives seem like Lent without Easter. We stop at Good Friday without the resurrection message. Or again, he says, an evangelizer must never look like someone who has just come back from a funeral, sad-faced, depressed. No, that's not the attitude of a true evangelizer. And one more, he says, We must not become pessimists, always seeing the negative, or sour pusses. Yes, that I asked people, it's true in Spanish, in Portuguese, and other languages, and it's true in English. A sourpuss is someone whose face always looks sad. Francis says that's not an evangelizer. And so, indeed, yes, we do not fall, even though there are many challenges, we do not fall into sadness, sourpusses. If people don't hear the gospel from joyful evangelizers, they will not hear it at all. Francis mentions various challenges that the church faces. We don't deny those. The challenges come in many forms. But, Pope Francis says, challenges exist to be overcome. We are realists, yes, but without losing our joy, our boldness, and our hope-filled commitment. Indeed, the challenges we face must not rob us of missionary enthusiasm. Francis says, let us not allow ourselves to be robbed of missionary vigor. And so, friends, this is very, very brief, and I'm covering a lot of ground and material, but indeed we get some very, very good insights from the 4 mission documents of the Vatican II era, Ad Gentes from Vatican II itself, Evangelii Nunciandi from St. Paul VI, Redemptoris Missio from St. John Paul II, and now recently Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel from Pope Francis. I trust that this very brief and succinct introduction will be helpful in understanding the renewed thinking of the Church regarding her missionary task and her missionary commitment. Thank you all. Good day to everyone. Thanks again.